Hello, in my last lecture, we looked at various dimensions of job and how the job system need to be linked to the payment system and some of the characteristics of compensation system. We move on to another important aspect of the human resource management, but today also has developed into its own independent field with a very specialist orientation, a field called the organization development. Organization development has emerged as a field of interest in managing change, in bringing about change in the organization at various levels. It has a strong philosophy. Several methodologies have been standardized over a period of time and a history of bringing about and managing complex organization based on theory, understanding and application. So in this session we will try and focus on the following things: that you should be able to understand and appreciate the concept and definition of organization development, the various characteristics of organization development, and also some of the historical development of organization development and the kind of researchers and the people where they have contributed to this, the traditional approach, how how people have done in the past, and particularly the sensitivity training, the grit training, and also some concepts of organizational change. And at the end you should be able to get a complete view of the focus of this field itself. Organization development has been defined by different authors in different ways. So it is defined as a planned process of change in an organization culture through the utilization of behavioral sciences, behavioral science technology, research and theory. I think let me elaborate on this quickly. So basically it is a planned change. It is a planned process of bringing about change in the organization with respect to its technology, or maybe with respect to its structure, or with respect to the processes or the people. So people, process, structure as well as the technology are seen as the four basic systems and subsystem of the organization. And through that, an organization culture, we try and change these things. How do we do this is based on the utilization of behavioral science, research and theory. So when we talk about behavioral science, it is psychology, it is the sociology, anthropology, to an extent economics and other fields which are concerned about the behaviors of the organization or behaviors in the organization. And sometimes the research has come through the theory or also through experimentation. So most of the time we refer to as the field of action research. So you also develop understanding of the organization through various intervention. So when we look at the planned change, it separates the OD efforts from other kinds of more haphazard changes. So what is planned change? That means it starts with a diagnosis. It identifies the needs as perceived by the organization, as perceived by the members of the organization and the stakeholders. And then it focuses on what can be done based on the assessments of the people. So it is highly collaborative, systematic, based on the diagnosis, and that is what it is. So it is one of the key elements of organization development is it is not an unplanned or an haphazard change, but it is a planned change. Then the other important thing is the comprehensive change. So the OD efforts are generally involved with respect to the total system. That means you have a total system view. As I mentioned earlier, you may see organizational system consisting of technology, organizational structure, organizational processes, as well as the people. So when you focus on the people, you are all the time bothered about whether the processes and the culture and the structure are supporting these changes and the initiatives or not. So the emphasis is also upon the work groups. So the intact work group is also at the focus of organization development. Apart from bringing about the comprehensive change, so the comprehensive change in the work systems. So OD it's a planned change, it's a very comprehensive change considering all the systems and subsystems of the organization, and then it is working with intact work groups to bring about and sustain change. And it is also the long range change. It is not that very cosmetic or anything. It may take some time, take months, sometimes in years, but it is a long range view of the organization that certain changes takes time, certain changes takes more effort than a minimum level of interaction. So it's a long range change, means a good collaboration is required between the organizational members as well as people who are attempting to introduce and bring about these planned changes. And also it is based on the participation of the change agents. So that means today we are thinking of either an insider or an outsider. So whether it is, the question is, it started earlier as an outsiders, but more and more we are also seeing organization development is dominated by the internal change agents. So the change agents act as a kind of a catalyst. So they help in diagnosis, they help in changing this diagnostic information, they help analyze, understand the individual, the group behaviors as well as the culture and the context of the organization. They relate some of these experiences one to the other and then help build the required collaboration and the trust, and that is how it is. The another key dimension or the key characteristic of organization development is the participation of the change agents. The emphasis is upon intervention and action research. So that means the results in an active intervention in the ongoing activities of the organization. So the change agents are open to learn, but they are systematic. They are prepared to learn from the success as well as the failure, and you typically know what is that planned effort you are trying to do or the initiatives being deployed, and the intervention and action research means you learn from the action and then that is systematic, it is analyzed, understood, validated, verified by the members of the organization, or it is verifiable by the others as well. If we look at from all this, the look at the historical developments of OD. So the characteristics of OD, as we have understood, it's a planned change, focusing on the system, having an action research approach, build on a long range collaboration and the long range effort, and then bringing about change in the systems and practices. So, but historically if you see, it is difficult to pinpoint the precise beginning of the OD. There are people who have worked extensively in the extension work where they wanted to demonstrate the change of the habits of the farmers, and they use some of the group methods in introducing new crop in for the new methods of growing seeds with respect to the farmers. Probably these are at 1920s can be seen as initial efforts of bringing about plant change. Then we have also seen in the European context, the Levinian, the Kurt Levin, when he introduced the group dynamics. So people have looked at it or seen historically these things have been captured at different points of time where people have intervened in the intact work system as a standard intervention using group methods to bringing about change. So, but some of the best of the things have been documented by the author French and Bell in their book on organization development. So the historical development of the OD, if you see, has emerged from the applied behavioral science and the social psychology, particularly those of them who focused on the group and the group behaviors, and then the lot of efforts from subsequent efforts to apply what people use this word laboratory training and the survey feedback. The survey feedback methodology, which I am going to elaborate, also gave insights to the total system. So the one group of people focused on the individual and individual in relation to the group and use of the group processes to bring about more sensitivity in the individual, and through that they brought changes at the organizational level. And the other one started the perception of the organization itself by the members of the organization as a whole, and then get that kind of a macro picture, sharing that macro picture as making it as a motivational tool, do the organizational diagnosis, and based on the organizational diagnosis initiate the required change. I think the idea of this, the French and Bell, where they have documented the beginning of this started with these two initiatives. So describe the history of OD as emerging about 1957 very clearly, and at least the three origins have been stated. One is in terms of the Douglas McGregor's work with Union Carbide in an effort to apply some of the concepts from L group training or the T group training or laboratory training to a large system. That is one specific application at the beginning. The other is the human relations group at the SO company that began to view itself as an internal consulting group offering its services to field managers rather than as a research group writing reports for top managers. That means they become internal consultants. And with the help of this Robert Blake and Herb Shepard, the group began to offer laboratory training in the refineries of SO. So this is another kind of a beginning one can see where you applied some of the understanding of the group processes and then see how it could be deployed in the actual organizational context. And the other is the University of Michigan, the Survey Research Center, which started using the attitude surveys. A systematic attitude surveys were conducted. Attitude surveys then were given as a kind of a feedback to the members of the organization, and this provided an agenda to bring about change in the organizational systems and practices. I think survey feedback as a kind of a methodology also has been documented very well by the Nadler in his book Feedback in Organization Development. So if you see, from no doubt it started with the beginning of this human relations school, then the T group and the L group kind of a lab training methodologies, as well as the survey feedback methodologies. But the OD has grown continuously over last 3 decades, and it is continues to grow with people bringing different dimensions and different contribution to this field. Some of the first generation contributions include, it is not to elaborate all of these things, but to acknowledge some of the typical contribution is Chris Argyris, where he talked about learning and action science, tries to, where he tried to integrate the individual and the organization. Chris played a very significant role in identifying the sensitivity training and how this could be applied to the groups, the people, and then how group methods can be used to bring about change at the organizational level. Juan Benes is another. He talked about very extensively the executive leadership, and then how to link this executive leadership and bring about strategic change in the organization. In fact, he used the word organization development as re-educative strategy. And then Edgar Schein also used the word the kind of a process approach, and Robert Tenenbaum talked about the sensitized OD to the personal dimension of the participants' lives. So that means through education and through collaboration, how changes could be brought. One can also think in terms of the second generation contributions. They include the Warrenbergs. Warrenberg talked about particularly through his extensive editing and then having that kind of an OD conference, he brought this OD into a professional field. So continuously reworking on the practices, the philosophy, and the kind of approaches people adopted got questioned, and then refinements were seen through the efforts of Warrenberg. And then Greiner, who talked about the power and evolution, the age and size of the organization. So contributing the theory development and applying this theory to organizational collaboration practices. Then we also see the Lawler and others, they worked towards extended OD to the reward systems and the employee involvement. How some of the interventions can be linked to the other interventions. Margulies and Anthony Raya is another thing we talked about. They talked about the values underlying OD. So the values of organization development means it is more towards theory Y of the McGregor. It believes that people are motivated, people are responsible, and then what is required is the organization to be guided. Organization, once they understand what are the discomforts, what are the critical areas, they do get motivated and take action. Similarly, we have seen the developing OD as a kind of a practical science has been documented by Peter and Craig in some of their works. So historically, if you see last 3 decades, substantial contributions have come from different practitioners and also documenting various approaches. Then people also have talked about today, Dave Brown talked about action, research and developmental organization. Then Cummings as a part of the socio-technical systems. Then the concepts of self-designing organizations and trans-organizational development, particularly the global organization. And then some of the authors also have talked about the political aspects of organization development, and then also some of the authors put the OD on a sound research and conceptual base, but it has always grown around these 2 major techniques. One is the significant T group and sensitivity training approach, and the other is the kind of a grid training, and apart from this is the survey feedback system of OD and how it is presented, how it is analyzed, and how it is deployed for not only diagnosis but also for the assessment and evaluation. When you see the sensitivity training approach, it is basically evolved from the group dynamics concepts of Kurt Lewin. So that means group can be an important instrument in creating understanding for the people to see their own perceptions and correct their perceptions and build that kind of a relationship with others. So the first specific sensitivity training session was held as documented in 1946 on the campus of the State Teachers College in New Britain, Connecticut. So this kind of a methodology has been used in the beginning, has become a technique very widely used by a variety of professionals in varieties of context. And there are 6 major target populations at which laboratory training is aimed. That means, to bring this kind of a sensitivity, either one can use a kind of a family group or could be a group of strangers. But ideally, both the practices are in vogue. That is, family group means people working in the same organization, or they know each other from the beginning. So it is less, kind of a less threatening, and that kind of an education, the educational or the emotional support is already there. It is also true in other contexts where the strangers are brought together, and which could be sometimes very threatening to share some of the very personal views. So in the question of the if you see how the laboratory training has been used, it has aimed at professional helpers with educational and consultative responsibilities. It has also focused on the middle and the top management, and it has focused on the total membership of a given organization. That means it has been practiced at the worker level to the senior most level. It has also been used as a layman and professionals in a very heterogeneous occupational group. It has also been used in children, youth and college students as a kind of a personal growth labs, and also persons with different cultural and national background. The success stories have been documented, and the specific advantages also have been made available through several of the research studies. The goals of sensitivity training is to make participants aware of and sensitive to emotional reactions and expressions in themselves and others. So that means people try to look at their own strengths and weaknesses as perceived by themselves, and also as perceived by the others, and then one can also see what is their own emotional things of the kind of angriness, or if they are very feeling sad about certain things, what they are excited about, what is that they get charged. So many of these internal things which are known to the individual, but many a times not too so clearly or openly, gets elaborated in the group processes. It is also to increase the ability of participants to perceive and to learn from their own ideas and the others' feelings. So that means you request others to help you out in a group setting, and then you participate and contribute to the growth of the others. So you give as well as you get. I think that's the focus of the sensitivity training. Then the stimulate the clarification and development of personal values and goals. So one need to articulate in terms of the life planning maybe, or in terms of the how one would like to be perceived over a period of time. So what is one's own perception, and also what the issues perceived by the others. I think these things are compared. And also to develop concepts and theoretical insights which will serve as tools in linking personal values. So what is most important is sometimes to develop the ability to work with others, bring that kind of a team culture, and also to see to bring that kind of a required openness, transparency. So many of these things can be developed through active collaboration, which can be demonstrated in the sensitivity training setting. So to foster the achievement of behavioral effectiveness, you are able to comprehend, you are able to relate, you are able to relate to the other persons at the intellectual level as well as at the emotional level. Sensitivity training has been evaluated for its effect on the performance of the organization, and many have seen, yes, it does contribute to the overall performance of the organization, but there are many others who have also said it is one of the limitations where you cannot really link the changes at the individual level to the overall performance. The other method has been the grid methodology of training. So it's an outcome of the managerial grid approach to leadership. Robert Blake and Jane Moulton talked about very extensively on this. In other words, they talked about that every manager can be thought in terms of the kind of concern what they have about the production. So it can be seen in the x-axis. Then also what they have a concern for the people on the y-axis. So this concern for production and concern for people can be expressed a value of 1 to 9. 1 to 9 on the x-axis, 1 meaning very low and 9 meaning very high. Similarly on the y-axis, 1 meaning very low and 9 meaning very high. So that means then you get characterization in this grid where you get 1 managers who have a low concern for production and very low concern for people. Similarly, you will get managers, if you see 9-1 managers, where they have a high concern for production and very low concern for people. And similarly, you have 1-9 managers. 1-9 managers have very low concern for production and a very high concern for people. And then you have a 5-5 managers who have a moderate concern for production as well as people, and then 9-9 managers who have a high concern for production and high concern for people. So when they describe this kind of a grid, so the managers can adopt a leadership style depending on. So they also characterize this leadership in terms of how do they approach people, how do they resolve conflicts, how do they build their group. So the 1-1 managers are typically not interested in leaders, in the production or in the people, are called as a kind of a lose-lose kind of a style, not bothered about anything, and such the behaviors do not contribute to the group or to the group development. Similarly, they talked about the 9-1 kind of a managers. They are highly bothered about production. So then they don't like any problems of the people. It is described as a win-lose kind of a style. Win-lose leadership always try to settle one against the other, and they don't look for opportunities for collaboration. And they are highly intolerant of the problems posed by the people, and they think that they are lazy, they don't want to do the work, and so the negative assumptions about the people. Similarly, the 1-9 managers, they are highly bothered about people but not really concerned about the production, described as a kind of a country club managers, also described as a yield-lose kind of a style. In the yield-lose style, they are pleasing people, they are postponing the work, then they are less concerned for the production or to the organization. And on the 9-9, they described very clearly as a win-win strategy, and those of them integrating. And a 5-5 was seen as a kind of a compromise. In brief, the grid methodology provided a kind of a normative model of bringing about change, and a more comprehensive step-by-step approach was able to take when the kind of a grid method is used in OD. So similarly, there are other normative methodologies got developed in terms of the leadership styles and practices. Also in the systems of management, what Francis Licker talked about from system 1 to system 4, system 1 being very autocratic system, authoritative system, to a system 4 which is highly participative kind of a system. So the grid method as well as the systems of management kind of a concepts provided the businessman a language to describe their current managerial preferences. So they were able to see what the current styles are, and they were able to relate to the desired or desirable kind of a system, so they were able to analyze. So in the 6 phases of the grid training, if you see systematically it follows. One with the kind of a seminar training. In a laboratory seminar training is it introduce the participants to the overall concepts and material used in grid training. The one which I mentioned to you earlier is to explain the full concept and then possibly do a kind of a questionnaire and give that kind of an instrument where people were able to analyze some of their own styles and then kind of an understanding. So once those things data is gathered, then what was learnt in the orientation stage is applied to the actual organizational situation. So that means the teams, when they work together, then they are told what is that they are really focusing on. Are they focusing on the task and the production, or are they focusing on the people, or they are not bothered about anything, or they are focusing on integration? So the team gets the sensitivity in terms of their own methods and procedures, and then they are taken at the intergroup level, how they handle the conflict situations and how they resolve these things, and the kind of approach what they adopt in terms of the grid style of conflict resolution and conflict management. Then based on this participation, the contributions, and then one would like to see what are the important changes to be put in the system and practices. I think then the organizational level, the methodologies are identified in terms of changing the styles and practices. Then one can also see the next level of practice is attainment of goals. The participant attempt to accomplish the goal which was set in the previous phase. They were practicing and also getting that kind of an actual feedback about how effectively they are doing it, and making sure that they stabilize their style and bringing about that kind of a change in their style of functioning and moving most of the managers towards this kind of a 9-9 style, and the overall evaluation of their own style of functioning, also called as the stabilization stage. These are the 6 phases of the grid development. Another which we mentioned is the survey feedback. One of the first but still very popular OD technique has been the survey research and the feedback of the data. The survey methodology means that you design a questionnaire. The questionnaire would provide a kind of a diagnostic methodology. So people are asked to describe how the system is as of today, and then how the system should be. So a current versus a kind of a desired system. So the current and the desired system gives that kind of a gap, what people call it as the need deficiency, or also this approach is called the disparity profiling. So current versus the desired state then will help people to discuss what it is now and what it should be. So in a survey methodology, first step is to design a proper instrument and a questionnaire, asking the right set of questions, and then using that questionnaire to explore the perceptions of the people, and then recording some of these perceptions in a systematically, and using statistical methods aggregate the data in terms of their central tendencies, and also show how different groups have perceived and are there any differences in these perceptions. Different groups within the organization could be based on the age or based on the kind of functions what they are handling, production versus marketing, or marketing versus the finance, or finance versus the R&D, or it could be the layers within the organization, top management versus the supervisory layers, or supervisory versus the workers, or it could be the different interest groups in the organization, that union versus the management representatives. So that means a feedback can be based on the kind of analysis required, and also the action need to be taken. So the data was analyzed, and then systematically the details are provided. So this OD survey feedback approach forms the basis of very popular methodologies today of 360-degree feedback technique, which provides information to the individuals from his or her boss, subordinates, etc. So but the survey methodology has been, the feedback technique is the only one that found out through the entire organization. So it is possible to populate and cover the complete all the members of the organization. So survey feedback methodology, as popularized by the Survey Research Center of the University of Michigan, that it is studied and concerned itself with the combination of structural, technical and interpersonal issues and of consequences to the whole organization. So that people were asked to describe the perception and the experiences. So the coverage was comprehensive, and then was able to study the complete systems and practices of the organization, and then people were able to describe how the system was to how the system is, or how the system is and how the system should be. So this also enabled that people were able to see that kind of a contrast of the past to the present or present to the future. This methodology also helped not only for the diagnostic purposes, but after an evaluation in the organization system, it also helped for the evaluation of the interventions. So that means it also provided a sound methodological basis to see, are there any changes, because of the intervention. So the survey feedback and the what we talked about is the L group training or the T group training and the grid training led to many combination of interventions. So it is also popularly described as the OD technology. So the team building is one of the interventions. So team building is a process of diagnosing and improving the effectiveness of the work group with particular attention to work procedures and interpersonal relationships within it. So that means the focus is on overall effectiveness in terms of the goal and goal setting, in terms of the work procedures, so where it is the focusing on the role and the role relationships, and also the interpersonal relationships with respect to the communication, with respect to the trust, things like that. So team building has emerged as another important intervention. So both the task procedures and the human interactions have been the subject of change and the study in team building. So the team building interventions have focused on the role relationship, goal and task achievement, and the interpersonal relationship and the communication and trust building. So the basic assumption of team building is that increasing the effectiveness of teams will improve the overall organizational effectiveness. So teams have been seen as a kind of a building blocks, and the building blocks have been used to build that overall changes in the organization. So has been directed at to different types of teams of the working groups. So some of them also have used that intact teams as well as the different members of the organization, but not necessarily working members of the same team, but approaches have been same and similar. The other intervention is the process consultation. In process consultation approach to organization development, what the focus is on to work with the intact teams or intact work groups, and the consultant becomes a kind of a participant observer, or the change agent becomes a participant observer, and then helping the group to be aware of how they are perceiving the goals and what kind of methodologies are they adopting and how they are functioning as effective team members or not. So the process consultation has been aimed at include communication and functional roles of the group members. The specific steps, if you see in process consultation, the initial contact, the client contacts the consultant with a problem, and then about the way they are functioning and the way they are handling the problem, and then there is a definition of the relationship. The consultant and the client enter into a formal contract spelling out the services, time and span, and the fees, that basically how much time they spend together. And the role of the process consultant is to mirror. So it is also a step called the organizational mirroring. So in other words, he is now doing the team mirroring, and they are also setting a method. So this step involves an understanding of where and how the consultant will do the job, and then what are the best methods that needs to be handled. In a process consultation methodology, he gathers the data and then makes a diagnosis. So, this data gathering occurs simultaneously with the entire consultative process. So, that means as I said, that as a participant observer, the change agent who makes the notes of how the team members are reacting, how the leadership is functioning, what is the kind of a trust, what is the kind of openness, and how do they focus on the problem, and how good or how practical their interactions are. These kinds of views are reflected at the end of the interaction, at the end of the meeting. So, the process consultation, when it happens, so there is a clear intervention with respect to the agenda setting, the feedback, the coaching. Sometimes the structural interventions are also made as a part of this, so that rearrangements to facilitate their task and help them to do the problem solving. The process consultation methods, also to see, then the last step is to reduce involvement, so that they do not depend upon the change agent or the consultant. So, the consultant disengages from the client organization by mutual agreement, but leaves the door open to the future involvement. So, that means there is a very clear time frame within which all these 6 steps need to be completed. The other thing is the third party peacemaking. This intervention is specifically aimed at resolving interpersonal, intergroup conflict. So, the Richard Walton talked about very clearly as with the third party peacemaking. So, in the organizational situations, the intervention is directly aimed at conflict resolution. So, the third party peacemaking it is a systematic approach to cover the dysfunctional conflict resolution. So, it is very clearly use the conflict and conflict resolution to the positive side of the organization, and then Walton suggested many of the methodologies which to be used. So, for the ideal third party, the peacemaker, but is the one who has high professional expertise regarding the social processes, very clearly understands how the parties are organized, how the two parties move with respect to their problems. Is it their conflict is at the value level, or the stakes are at the low level? So, he could understand some of these things. And also they do not believe in the low power over the fate, right, of principles. So, the principles of negotiations are adopted, high control over the confrontation setting and processes. That means people are prepared to work through their problems, then giving it to the chance, or taking a position that you go your way, I go my way kind of a thing. And also the clear moderate knowledge about the principles, the issues, and also the background factors which is contributing to the conflict. So, that means you are able to explore these details with the parties involved in the conflict situation, and also the neutrality or a balance with respect to the substantive outcomes or the personal relationships, and also the conflict resolution methodologies. So, in other words, how it should be sorted out. Many of these things the third party very clearly takes that kind of a neutral role or that kind of a balancing role. So, the third party peacemaking was seen as another standardized intervention. So, as we are trying to see overall, the field has developed from a simple concern, simple intervention of bringing about and managing changes in the organizational system. But as we have seen, the concept has evolved over a period of time. Today it is a kind of a multidisciplinary. The field of organization development itself has changed from a very simple 2 methods of laboratory training to the field of the survey research, to it has now a big repertoire of the interventions. the interventions such as what we have talked about, the team building, or it is in terms of the third party peacemaking, or it is the process consultation. And when we examine the characteristics of OD, which is very highly concerned with the planned change, bringing about the planned changes in the organization, has a very systems view of the organization consisting of the technology, the process, the structure and the people, and integrating this techno-structural approaches or people human processual approaches, and has a direct concern or a bearing about the effectiveness of the organization on the one hand and the satisfaction of members on the other. So, the characteristics of OD is not only about bringing about planned change, but it takes a systems view of the organization, and then it builds on very clearly that it works with a collaborative team, and as a part of the planned change it has a diagnosis, it has an intervention and it has an evaluation. All this demands that it is a long range approaches to bringing about planned change in the organization, not a kind of an event or a one-off kind of an approach to bring about change. So, the organization development has a strong philosophy and several methods of standardized intervention which has evolved over a period of theory and practice. So, it is also called as a field of applied behavioral science. It draws heavily on the individual behaviors from psychology, about the emotions, about the personality, about the attitudes, about the perception, about learning. So, the learning to attitudes to the perception is drawn from the psychology, and then you also draw very heavily from the field of social psychology and particularly the group behaviors. What is the relationship of the individual to the overall goals of the organization? So, the aspects like role, the trust, the relationship, some of these things are drawn from the field of social psychology. The influence of the group on the individual, that is in terms of the processes of de-individuation, part of the crowd behavior from the field of social psychology. So, these things have helped to look at the various integration points from the sociology to the social psychology to the psychology. Sometimes the views of anthropology is also viewed about the culture and the influence of culture and the stereotypes what one would draw at the group level or at the organizational level. And it is heavily on to that, depends upon the diagnosis. So, many of the diagnostic instruments and the checklist to see what the organization is of today, and also identifying the requirements of the tomorrow, developing that kind of a disparity profiling, developing the kind of framework within which the action can be explored and the action can be judged, and the instruments also helped in assessments. The characteristics of the OD also, it became very systematic in terms of the standardization of the approaches and the practices, as we have seen the Likers systems of organization, or the Robert Blake and Moulton's the grid method of approaching the problem, where the managerial grid kind of a concepts, or system 1, system 2, system 3 and system 4 practices of the Likers were deployed to explore very clearly how organization is moving from one level of practice to the other level of practice. We have also seen historically how some of these techniques have blended and contributed to the over a period of time by different authors and making different contributions at different points of time. And we have also seen this, the traditional approaches and also the other emerging approaches. What we will do in the next session is further elaborate on the drivers of the organizational change, the way the changes are coming and affecting at different levels. So, one will also see the forms of organizational change in terms of the structure, in terms of the systems, in terms of the people and the processes, and also how to look at the analytical approaches to organizational change, the issues of measurement of practices and the effectiveness. We will also see the performance management, that means how do we see develop high performance culture, and also see why do the OD, and also who does this kind of an OD or the organization development, and also explore the different dimensions of ethical values involved in the organization development practice, and who could be that the OD professional. So, we will also take that view, what is the breadth and the depth of the field of organization development in our next lecture.